But that particular study had an obvious problem. The only evidence was molecular, and no actual fossils were ever found. And that's actually the biggest problem with studying the boring period. Because the Earth was so quiet and there was no
Hey guys,
geological
today
activity,
I'm going to
there
be
was
starting
actually
this
no
survivor
fossils.
series.
And so we don't actually have a lot of fossils from
Come
the
on,
period
Minecraft
showing us
people, boom,
We have
Minecraft.
fossils of bacteria, and there are certain fossils resembling some kind of an algae, but they're extremely rare and generally do not show much. And so up until I guess this point, it was almost impossible to imagine what any of this type would look like. And then you have this new study. And once again, this was discovered completely by accident. The scientists studying this were the biologists.
No soy donde se
Specifically beryl and potash. And here they gathered this from one of the Ukrainian mines.
That's only
It's known to contain quite a lot of different gemstones. This mine is known as the Volin mine, and this whole discovery is now known as the Volin Biota. But because they were actually studying these structural blocks using advanced electron microscopy, they didn't realize that completely by accident, a lot of these samples
screw you.
strange three-dimensional
About to be in a wash cave. Yo, chat, which one should I do? This one or this one? Yo, did I just place on my wood?
Well, I think this one, probably being the coolest, and also being the one that's kind of difficult to explain. But of course, the biggest question now being, so is this what that light looks like? Is this the light that was just described in that other study from just a few months ago? And is this the representation of the transitional stage between prokaryotes and eukaryotes? So right now the answer is, I don't know. But I'm sure many of us want to believe it. These are essentially the oldest three-dimensional microfossils ever discovered. And this is like 1.5 to 1.8 billion years old. This was actually present inside a relatively clear silicate present inside the earth. Even stranger, a lot of these appear to be cellular. And some of them do appear to be quite complex.
Give me the cover back.
Described as the fungal microorganism, but some of them also seem to contain some kind of shell around the cells. But more importantly, a lot of these structures have never been seen before.
Survival series.
Different from anything we observe today, or from anything in the last billion years. And in terms of size, some of these are pretty small, just over some micrometers in size. But some of these were large. Quite a few of these were at least several millimeters in size. The ones with filaments and with multiple structures seem to be the biggest. But exactly what any of this is anyone's guess. These are literally the first ever skeletons preserved in ancient samples that we can physically see and observe in 3 dimensions. Pretty much all of the other samples are usually from much younger animals, such as the ones from Cambrian explosion. And one of the main reasons we don't really have any samples from before is for one of the reasons, skeleton. Anything that does not have skeleton is very difficult to preserve in fossils, which is why all of the previous discoveries were just based on chemistry or based on
mining node for pickaxe.
not so much actual physical shape.
Pickaxe.
There was some, but it was
Cool.
But now we have physical representation of something that existed on Earth almost 2 billion years ago, and all of this preserved in relatively high detail. But I guess the question is, so what do we actually know? So do we know anything about this life? Well, the only thing the researchers seem to be very certain about is where exactly this life might have existed, or basically what sort of life this was. And it was most likely terrestrial life, but not surviving on the surface. Instead, living inside some sort of geyser-like structure, possibly hundreds of meters below the ground. And this geyser system potentially contains all the necessary biological components required for the growth and proliferation of these organisms. So here they were basically surviving inside some kind of cavity, possibly as deep as 2 or 3 kilometers. But because some of this water was extremely rich in silicon fluoride fluids, once the liquid started escaping to the surface, it almost instantly fossilized a lot of its life, while also creating all the minerals the scientists recovered. With the main implication being that a lot of this very likely existed in extremely deep underground habitats, with many of these microorganisms very likely surviving and thriving right
Guys,
next to the
I
rocks.
just heard a skeleton. I think
This was not the most common organism that existed back then, and possibly it represented some kind of a niche,
Oh, I don't know. No,
in similar conditions this is just a brand new discovery, other than the actual pictures, there's just not much else. But the pictures themselves are definitely super cool. Just the fact that this survived for almost 2 billion years and is still visible today is already quite impressive. And because now we know where to look for more similar life, there might be more incredible discoveries from this tiny little period in the next few months.
I use the Breeze fabric refresher every day to make my home smell amazing. On my bed, my couch, my jacket or jeans, in between washes, even shoes. Febreze doesn't cover hot odors with scent, but fights them and freshens. Over 1,000 uses. Febreze fabric refresher.
Spectrum Business works with millions of small business owners, so we know you're made to be tough, strong, reliable. That's why Spectrum Business is made to work. Internet, phone, TV, and mobile solutions made to take on any challenge. Spectrum Business, made to work.
What snacks are we in the mood for?
Listen, Mom, let's get down to brass tacks and pick these. They taste good and they're good for me.
Sure. Where'd you hear the term brass tacks?
Kind kids, all kinds of good, and school friendly.
We believe no journey is taken alone. Toyota, start your impossible.
Right now at PetSmart, get a free bag of Merit Power Bite Treats when you spend $60 on Merit.
A wonderful person, this is Anton, and today we're going to be discussing some of the new discoveries in regards to the spin of planet Earth and
Just
in
don't
regards
figure
to
out
how much
what
it
it's
changed
already
in the
done.
last few billions of years. More specifically, we're going to be discussing a discovery from a recent study that found something really intriguing about the mysterious period we sometimes refer to as boring billion. The period, surprisingly, even the actual rotation of the planet has not changed a lot, remaining at approximately 19 hours per day.
Only one piece of
it. Surprising because we expect the rotation of the planet to change quite dramatically over time. And so let's discuss this new discovery and all of these findings in more detail. But let's start with a brief history of planet Earth. Approximately 4 billion years ago, the planet received a collision
I don't know.
referred to as Theia. This created modern Earth and our moon, both of which you see right there. And as both objects evolved over time, quite a lot changed on both the moon and planet Earth. Or more importantly, today we know that the moon was obviously much closer to planet Earth when it was just formed. It was only a few thousand kilometers away from planet Earth in the region we refer to as the Roche limit, or basically a region around the planet or a star where technically the object becomes a ring. But by going a little bit farther away, the object starts to solidify, becoming its own structure, and in this case, this is how the moon became the moon. And so as the rings around Earth changed into a single object, at some point this object started to exhibit a lot of tidal effects on planet Earth. Today we obviously refer to these as tides, but back then, as you can imagine, these were much stronger and potentially had distinct effects on the planet that we couldn't imagine. But one of these effects was in regards to the rotation of the planet. It's believed that when the planet was just formed, it was probably spinning really fast, possibly as fast as a single rotation per 4 hours. But the moon gradually absorbed some of the Earth's rotation, slowing the planet down, while at the same time boosting the moon into much higher orbit. And so within just 30,000 years, the rotation decreased by 2 hours, from 4 hours to 6 hours. And a lot of modern calculations create a kind of a curve here, basically suggesting that the rotation started to decrease quite dramatically at first, but over time decreased less and less. So for example, 2.5 billion years ago, when we believe photosynthesis appeared on the planet, it's quite likely that a single day was about 18 hours long. Intriguingly, there's actually a study that should be somewhere in the description that even made calculations about how fast the planet has to spin, or how slow it has to spin, for photosynthesis to actually be efficient enough and to work on a typical planet. If the planet spins really fast, and if a single day here is too short, we might actually not have enough daylight for photosynthetic life to produce anything. And so the planetary spin has to be slow enough for the daylight to be just long enough. In that paper, I believe the daylight had to be over 6 hours long. But based on previous mathematical models, the assumption was that the day was still decreasing in time, and after about 700 million years, or about 1.7 billion years ago, a single day was about 21 hours long. Whereas when the first multicellular life began on the planet, roughly around 1.2 billion years ago, the day was already 23 hours long. Although most of these are actually based on mathematical modeling, not as much as actual samples or actual evidence. Once again, because this was the boring billion, during that billion years there are not a lot of samples, and very few actual fossils to show us anything about anything. But it still made sense, at least mathematically, and especially because once we find samples and once we see evidence, especially in the last billion years or so, the changes in Earth rotation become quite obvious. And a lot of previous studies, especially the ones that produce really good evidence, came from the analysis of sedimentation rings around ancient corals. And many studies using these ancient corals show that the day was at least 1 hour shorter millions of years ago. You can actually find at least one video in the description that talks a little bit more about this, but the evidence here was pretty clear. And of course, made sense both geologically and physically in terms of what we know about the moon. The tidal effects from the moon are definitely pulling on the planet, slowing it down just enough. But all of this was based on much older studies and much older evidence, and using much older techniques. In the last years, the scientists have actually developed new techniques, and techniques that use something slightly different. One of these techniques is known as cyclostratigraphy, the study of much longer cycles inside various sediments, relying on the cycles we understand from astronomy. And the most famous cycles here would be what's known as Milankovitch cycles. The occasional changes in the way planet Earth orbits or spins on its own axis, which then very often influences certain climatic conditions on the planet. And specifically by using precession, which usually has cycles of 19 and 23,000 years, liquidity with a cycle of 41,000 but also 1.2 million years, and the cycles of eccentricity that seem to have periods of 100,000, 405,000, and 2.4 million years. And so even though previous studies mostly relied on these sediments produced as a result of tidal fluctuations, allowing us to discover hours per day in previous geological records, now it became possible to study even larger cycles by specifically focusing in the changes of orbits and how this then is reflected on the length of the day. And so during these cycles, the Milankovitch cycles, the way that the sediment deposits actually produces these patterns that can be then visible if you study enough of these samples from various locations. And perception and opportunity, which relate to the wobble and the tilt of the planet, seem to affect these samples the most. With all these sediments creating a kind of a rhythmic layering that would be difficult to explain any other way. But all of this data is relatively recent. As a matter of fact, this project right here, the cyclostratigraphy project, has mostly collected the majority of the data in just the last 10 years. And so none of these studies would even be possible a decade ago. But they're definitely possible now, and this new paper has just discovered something we didn't know about, and that's somewhat difficult to explain. By looking at these resonances, they discovered that the length of the day was more or less stable at approximately 19 hours per spin.
But I'm bored. The chance I will go to sleep there is probably
Only decreasing further in the last
but a
1
deep
billion
cycle
years
is the
afterwards.
weirdest
Or in
way
other words, the average
everything
day
that
on Earth was about 19 hours. For
I
the
don't
entire
go in a
geological
deep cycle. I
period,
wouldn't mind
in which,
that.
once again,
Mind if
not a
you
lot
did.
happened.
Mine out
And so instead of
successful
decreasing
on.
gradually and over time, as previously assumed, the geological record suggests otherwise. It actually
That
does suggest that the
cycle
rotation
would be
changed
my
dramatically
own.
prior to this, and then changed dramatically afterwards. But why, and I guess more importantly, why it didn't change for that billion years is of course unknown. Or maybe unknown, because here the scientists propose one potential explanation. There's at least one mechanism that can physically affect the spin of the planet, and that does not involve the moon.
That's what
I use Febreze
that's
Sanctified Plus,
what
and I use this.
you.
Febreze has a microchip to control scent release, so it smells first day fresh for 50 days. 50 days? And its refill reminder light means I'll never miss a day of freshness.
That's what I'm
Febreze Plug.
Where did Jolly Ranchers get their huge fruit flavor?
That's a lot of watermelon flavor.
Jolly Rancher, made with huge fruit flavor.
Instead, it involves the other thing that has tidal effects on planet Earth, the sun. And so the reason they believe the rotation was more or less constant is because of very unusual tidal effects caused by the sun, specifically solar atmospheric tides. And so while the tides from the moon are responsible for slowing down the planet or the rotation of the planet, and in this case it's mostly the liquid water tides responsible for this, here the sun itself would also provide a kind of a push from the charged solar particles that would very likely heat the atmosphere of the planet, and instead of cooling on the planet, slowing it down, opposite effect.
That's good. So I'm just gonna go do some off-camera working. Okay, we found some coal. No,
As you can see, there's only a handful of data points for this study right now.
yeah,
The typical methods to basically tell us exactly what happened back then and how Earth was different from Earth. But I guess more importantly, the rotation of our
no
planet
idea
seems
what
to be related directly to the exact composition of the atmosphere. Since this happens a little bit after the first oxygenation event, when a lot of photosynthetic bacteria became extremely prominent on the planet, one assumption here is that all this life that existed on the planet potentially dramatically transformed the atmosphere through very active photosynthesis that changed the composition so much that it allowed for these unusual solar effects, resulting in solar tides. Effects so powerful that they lasted for a billion years, allowing the planet to ignore the effects from the moon, which was much closer and much more gravitationally potent. And so whatever answers we find here, they're probably going to help us discover more about the origin of life, and more importantly, the origin of complex life. Because it does actually look like a lot of this seems to be somewhat related. The sudden appearance of photosynthetic life seems to be correlated with a boring billion, and the sudden appearance of multicellular life, or more complex life, is correlated.
now I will. One piece of wood goes away after I smelt 2 iron, which means I guess 3 iron. Is it 4 iron? Five iron, 6 iron, 1,000,000,000 iron. So I forgot. Get that. I can craft I completely forgot to craft 6. Why would I want to craft 3 shields? Iron sword. Except that means now I can mine these diamonds. Yeah, I'll stand this.
I feel one opinion.
Kind of risky to get since like way behind.
This episode of the Wild Files is brought.
The scrape water is dead if this time even goes an inch follow. It's gone, bro. I'm dead. This time is please be 1, 2. Oh, dang it, there's not anymore.
I feel one opinion a lot of people share online is Jack Black seems to be a pretty okay person. You know, I remember growing up.
No. Oh, I just found the truth. I can look over. Wait. Whoa. Watch me work. Oh, the game's gonna play.